What is up, guys? Pie Muffin here, and we are back with another Tales of Arise news video. So, there is this article that has been floating around. It looks like it came out yesterday night. Excuse me. That kind of talks about more in the interview with Tomizawa. And we do get some more information on certain things about the game. So I did want to make a video on this. I mean, you'll know by the title what this video is mainly about, but we're going to go through everything here and kind of see what there is to be said. So we're not going to read everything, but we'll just kind of summarize what's kind of in each part. So they're basically saying it's... When the first trailer came out, people thought Tales of Arise was going to be like an open world game based on what we saw, which it isn't the case. It's still going to be area based. You know, you still have to go through load times, you know, to go to each area, and each area will be its own self-contained kind of place, like most Tales games. But this is what Tomizawa had to say. A reboot. So they're rebooting the series, but it's closer to the original games than you might think. So he is saying that it's a reboot of the series. So I've seen a lot of people upset, and I'm not, you know, anyone who feels the way that they feel about this game, you know, they're entitled to do so. Whether you're excited or whether you hate it, you know, you're totally entitled to that, because it is taking a big jump away from a lot of the stuff we're used to in normal Tales games. So if you're not feeling it, I totally get why. Comedic skits are returning. Motoi Sakuraba will be handling the soundtrack, as usual. And then the combat will resemble previous games in the franchise. In that vein, it's probably more appropriate to call it a refresh than a reboot. An opportunity to relieve the franchise fatigue that had crept in after 8 games in 9 years. Bump up the presentation and expand beyond... the cult fan base that has formed around the series. That's not a very nice way to put it, but I get what they were trying to say. They basically want to open up the franchise to more people around the world. They don't want it to, you know... In terms of popularity, it is a very niche franchise outside of Japan. So I guess their goal is to open it up to more people. So... You know, a lot of people will say, you know, well, then it's just becoming your standard, you know, RPG. Because a lot of the stuff that made it Tales is kind of not existent anymore. You know, people say how the normal linear motion battle system is not part of the game anymore, which I don't understand the specifics of that, so I can't really say. You know, yes, the gameplay is much like if you take a game like Xillia or... even Vesperia, obviously this is much different because you were still kind of running, in Xillia and Vesperia, you were still kind of running in that 2D line. You didn't have free run. I mean, you could use free run, but it wasn't free run all the time. I think Zestiria was the first. Well, Graces kind of had it that way. But then Zestiria was kind of the first one where you actually had an option for the game to, like, always be in free run. And then Berseria was just always in free run. There was no out of free run kind of way to do that. But, so yeah, there's a lot of changes being made in terms of, like, how the combat looks. You know, the combat is obviously, it seems very kind of, like, standard RPG kind of gameplay. And as opposed to, you know, being solely like how Tales was. So, you know, there are two sides of it. People are in love with it. People are hating it. I really have to play it myself to see how I feel about it. So I'm going to leave that judgment for once I actually have the game in my hands. By the way, if you want to pre-order the game, you can pre-order the collector's edition on the Bandai store, as well as all... I don't have a working Xbox, so I can't really say for Xbox, but I assume it's up there. But on PS5, all the standard, the digital deluxe, and then the ultimate edition are all up for pre-order. So I assume it's up on everything else. So if you are going to be pre-ordering, you'll be able to do that. Okay, Tales of Arise will mark the series debut on Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5. Tomizawa couldn't comment one way or the other on the possibility of a Switch release, so it could come, it might not come. Switch always seems to be late with all these releases. So even if it does come, it's the unfortunate thing, a lot of JRPGs, just games in general, if they're like third party, it always comes out on like the Switch and like PC like later. Luckily for PC, it's not coming out later. But for Switch, a lot of games will come out on, Xbox and PlayStation, and then the Steam and Switch release is like 3 or 4 months later. So could still happen, but if they're not talking about it now, then maybe it's either not ready, or maybe they're just not working on it, or they haven't decided if they're going to do it. Overhauling the previously creaky graphics. Okay. The person who wrote this article is definitely taking shots at old Tales games, that's for sure. It's not even creaky graphics. It was a certain style, but whatever. I'm not going to get mad at this person's wording. It will attempt to bridge the gap between old and new, dragging this... oh my god. Dragging the sometimes formulaic series into a new era. Okay, so they're basically just trying to make it feel new, which is what a lot of longtime franchises are trying to do right now. Is just kind of like, do something brand new so it doesn't feel the same. It's kind of like what the Trails series is doing, where the next game is not going to have, your normal Trails combat. It's going to have, an evolution of the old combat while also having action implemented into it. So this is kind of like the same thing there. We really wanted to send a message to international players and fans with this release that we are... We wanted to really send a message to the international players and fans with this release. We are going to really push forward and push the envelope and the whole concept of the game. The visuals, aesthetics, and all of those are evolving, but we also keep a lot of the things that everybody has known and loved over the years. So it's both a reboot in the sense that we want former Tales fans to come back to this game, as well as attract new players with these stunning new graphics. The visuals, aesthetics, and all the good stuff. So that's the whole thing here. So there's obviously two sides of this, like there is with everything with this game. They want returning players to come back. Yes, there might be some things that returning players may not like, but that's just when a franchise needs to breathe new life. Because at the end of the day, this game is made to make money. So they need to do stuff that's going to sell. Especially, they're really trying to push this whole international thing. Games like Berseria and Zestiria were not that popular in the West compared to stuff like Symphonia or Vesperia. I have a lot of, I've seen a lot of people that didn't even know that, because Berseria got overshadowed by Persona 5. For the Western release. It just that entire year, it just got completely overshadowed by Persona 5, and then Zestiria got released during this weird period, but between PS3 and PS4, and just a lot of people didn't even know about it. So I do get that they want this game to not just be for Tales fans, not just for anime fans. They want people to see the gameplay of this action RPG, and they want people to give it a try. So I get it. Like I said, if this isn't, it's okay. I want to say this. It's okay to stop continuing with a franchise if the franchise is no longer what you love. For example, and I'm not going to turn this into a whole topic about this, Dragon Ball has gone away from what I used to know and love. I'm really not into it as much anymore. I'll play the games and stuff, but the series itself and the story is just kind of like, I feel burnt out on it. Because it's not really what, I like anymore. So it's okay if Arise just isn't your cup of tea. You can say, or even if Berseria wasn't your cup of tea, you can be like, okay, Zestiria was the last Tales game I really enjoyed. The series is going a different direction. I'm going to tap out. I'm going to enjoy another franchise, which I know is hard for some people. I know for me, even if a franchise I love goes a different direction that I don't like, I sometimes still want to stick with it because I'm like, I love this franchise. I love the characters that come out of it. But sometimes you just got to be like, okay, this really isn't for me anymore. So this is going to be the new direction the franchise goes with Tales of Arise and probably the games moving forward. Now, of course, we could still see, remasters or just ports of like old games at some point. And when those come out, you can definitely play those because those will still be the same games unless they remake them, of course. But overall, it's okay to be done with the series after a certain point. Okay, so let's talk about what else. So it's both a reboot in the sense. Okay, so yeah, we already talked about that. Stunning might be too strong an adjective for Tales of Arise's graphics, but there's certainly a dramatic improvement over the previous games in the series. I mean, I agree. You compare how Berseria looks to Arise, it's definitely better graphics. Now, of course, there is still the whole topic of style, because Tales was always, kind of sticking to this anime style. And Tales of Arise, it will have anime cutscenes, so, it'll still be anime, but it feels much more... It's not in the Final Fantasy style in terms of graphics, but I feel like it's kind of close to that in terms of like how the design kind of looks for the characters and stuff. It's much less anime than Tales has ever been, if that makes sense. So relied on the graphics engine. The impression it conveys is Tales is, well, a Tales game, replete with exaggerated anime flourishes that should go over well with fans. Okay? I mean, it's still anime, but it's like, I don't know. I don't know how to word it. While we've yet to get full hands-on with the new game, it is easily the best-looking entry in the series to date. Yeah, in terms of graphics, definitely. The Tales series will also benefit of taking some time off. Up until recently, Namco Bandai had been pushing out Tales games on an almost annual basis. I mean, not exactly. I mean, there were times where, yes, there were annual, but there's been several points where, they took years off. But I get it. Making the series feel stale at times. Feel stales? Okay. Tales of Arise represents the largest gap ever between Tales series. The last major release being 2016's Tales of Berseria. Even before the pandemic, it was delayed due to what Tomizawa referred to as a lot of quality issues. Okay, so even without the pandemic, we might have the game now if it wasn't for the pandemic, but it still probably would have been pushed back to 2021. As well as the desire to launch on next-generation consoles, the extra work seemed to have paid off, giving Tales of Arise a sense of polish that the series has lacked of late. Okay? I mean, I'm really hoping this game is, like, amazing. Like, really long story. Everything looks beautiful. Like, that's definitely what I want to see. The length of the story is what I'm really, interested in, because I've mentioned this before. Berseria only took me 39 hours to beat on my first playthrough, and that's the shortest any Tales game has taken for me to beat. And I think that's mostly because, yes, there's side stuff that I missed out on, but a lot of the stuff that would have taken more time, I feel like, is, they kind of rush you with stuff. They give you the auto fast travel immediately. You don't actually ride around on the ship. It just pulls up a small mini map. So that definitely cut a lot of time out of, especially with exploration. Berseria didn't have too much in terms of that. The same can be said for combat, which have received a huge overhaul, Tomizawa says. While it retains the arena-based battle system of previous games, it will really improve on the player input and feedback loop of how the game and controls feel. It will include an evasion and countering system that is similar to Tales of Grace's, which Tomizawa refers to as very highly rated for its combat, as well as the ability to actively switch between party members, which has its own unique, interesting mechanics. So we saw that in the gameplay video, where you'll basically use the D-pad to switch between 4 characters. Now, I don't know if it's going to be like Berseria, where you can, on the fly, even when we have more than 4 party members, if we can switch between all 6, because there was a way to kind of, in Berseria, you could switch one of your back row characters, or your support team, back team, whatever you want to call it, with your active party. So it'll be interesting to see if they have that as well, but at bare minimum, you'll be able to switch between the 4 that exist in your party. Well, we haven't really seen the combat in action. Well, they dropped a 7-minute trailer. What do you mean you haven't seen it? But the new Tales of Arise trailer suggests it will put big emphasis on colorful super attacks. One thing it will not have, however, is multiplayer. This is the big thing, I'm making this video on. So this is pretty much confirms it. But let's talk about what they said. So, with few exceptions, the ability for multiple players to control characters has been a key feature going all the way back to the original Tales of Destiny, so its removal is a fairly big deal for the series. We're going to talk about this in a second, but let me get through this whole point right here when we're talking about multiplayer. Asked about the decision to cut multiplayer from Tales of Arise, Tomizawa says, so this game is really a standalone game where one person really enjoys the drama and the overall story of the game. We don't really have any plans for currently for a multiplayer mode, but on the other side, we did put a lot of focus on how characters work together, how they cooperate in battle, and how that plays out in game mechanics. So what they're basically saying is, I guess they're trying to say that the AI is going to be a lot better. But the issue with this is that, and this doesn't bother me specifically because I've never played a Tales game, with somebody. I tend to, story-based games I tend to like to play by myself, whether they have multiplayer or not, because I like to fully immerse myself in the story and not be distracted. But I get why people would be upset with this. I've already gotten tons of comments of people being like, oh, I've been playing this with my friend, since Tales of Symphonia. I've been doing, the couch co-op, and, this is a deal breaker for me, and I'm now not going to buy the game, which, if that's how you feel, that's fine. People play games in specific ways, and it's a big thing that they're removing. It's not a deal breaker for me in any way, but I can understand if it's a deal breaker for others. It is a very weird removal, but when you look at the combat, I really don't know how it would even, because it seems to really kind of like zoom in. It's not like a zoomed out kind of game. So I don't even know, unless there was like a split screen in the middle of your screen where just each character had a camera on them separately. I don't know how the co-op would work in this situation. Because you wouldn't be able to see the other character, at all. But I totally understand if you are upset about this. As it turns out, the comment comes up a lot when talking about Tales of Arise. This should probably come as a surprise. Why would this come? This probably should come as a surprise, given Tomizawa's history with God Eater. I think they meant this shouldn't come as a surprise. A Monster Hero competitor known for its fast-paced combat, Tomizawa talks a lot about a desire to keep a strong focus on the intensity of combat, which is one reason that Tales of Arise will once shift to combat arenas instead of staying on the field. It will also be relatively linear in its progression, though Tomizawa promises that it will feature a bunch of side quests as well as subroutes and detours. So, long story short, they're basically saying the game itself is going to be a pretty linear kind of like game. It's for the most part going to be, all right, you go from point A to point B. You can enjoy, the view along the way. But for the most part, you're pretty much, it's not going to be, like a lot of older Tales games were very open in terms of where you could go and when, like Symphonia and Vesperia. You go out into the big world, you kind of decide whether the story was there or not. There were multiple areas you could go to, but it seems like with Tales of Arise, it's pretty much going to be, okay, this plot point happened, you fought this guy, now we have to go to this town, so follow this road to get to this town. There might be a few people who need help along the way. There might be a extra side dungeon you can go in and, maybe get a special weapon. But for the most part, you're going point A to point B, which doesn't really bother me. I don't really mind linear stories, as long as they're, good. It's interesting to imagine what could have been. According to Tomizawa, the team actually did experiment with an open world version of Tales of Arise, but ultimately decided to stick with a more linear format. We actually did debate whether to go with an open world concept or a linear concept. This was something in the early stages we had a back and forth debate about. We actually ran tests simulating both situations, and ultimately we came to a decision that, as we mentioned, for reasons that we want the players to focus, we went with the linear option. We thought this was the best way for players to really enjoy what Tales of Arise is all about. Again, the story, character development, all that good stuff, we thought it was the best way to deliver gameplay to the player. I have to agree. I'm not always against open world games, but the issue I have with open world games is, I guess I can use Breath of the Wild as an example. There wasn't a lot of story going on. There was, I got the general gist of the story, when I was doing each of the, 4 divine beasts, and then of course you go and fight Ganon and all that stuff. But between all of that, it's really just, okay, you're just exploring this area. There's not really much going on in terms of story. So I'd much rather have a linear story that has, or a linear game that has a lot of focus on story rather than a game that's just kind of open, lets you go where you want to go. And, there's not really a concrete story going on at all times. So I'm happy that they went with this, because this tends to be better in terms of like RPG stories. If you disagree, that's totally fine. Not every RPG needs to be open world, especially given the comparisons that it would inevitably invite to the extremely successful Genshin Impact, but yeah, no. It's a gacha game, so it's a little different. But if the Tales series does indeed want to reach more international audience, some form of open-end exploration is probably needed, but in the meantime, a focused experience is certainly welcome, especially if Tales of Arise manages to improve on the drab hallway-like dungeons from previous games. Okay. If Tales of Arise does manage to garner a new audience, it can credit the decision to shift to PC and next-gen consoles. Its improved graphics and the fact that that anime is just generally vogue these days. Genshin Impact, Persona 5, even Atelier Ryza have shown how successful an anime RPG can be in the 5 years since Tales of Berseria's release. It's time right for Tales of Arise to guide the venerable series into the future. So there you go. So what to take away from this? They want to, kind of reinvent how the combat is and how the game is. It's going to be a much more linear game than Tales has ever been, which, like I said, as long as it's long enough and it's a good enough story, I don't mind with a game being linear. Because even with Trails games, after Sky, for the most part, they're pretty linear games. It's pretty much, you go where the game tells you. There's not a lot of room for exploration, besides, like, the towns you go to and stuff. So, there's that. No multiplayer, so I apologize, I shouldn't really apologize, but, I am sorry to those who really do like enjoying, playing with friends, whether you play with, like, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whether you play with your brother or sister or whoever. That is unfortunate, if you're able to play without, multiplayer. Obviously I think this is going to be a really good game, but if that's really, like, a make or break experience for you, then I totally get it. But let me know what you guys think down below. This went on longer than I originally wanted it to, but quite a bit to talk about here. No multiplayer, new direction for the series, and kind of a linear kind of game going on here. So I guess we'll see how it all goes. When September 10th rolls around in about actually 140 days. I know because I pre-ordered the digital Ultimate Edition today on PS5. So I will be looking forward to playing this game and seeing how it goes. But that's going to be it, guys. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe more if you're new to the channel. I'll see y'all next time. Have a wonderful day, everyone.